I'm honored today to welcome uh, the founder and the president of the JBS, Jewish Broadcasting Service, Rabbi Mark Golub. How are you, Mark?
Yeah, I am wonderful. And the most wonderful thing is to see you again and to be with you and your audience again.
And as I said privately, I want to also publicly thank you because every session is a learning experience for me.
That's lovely.
So today I wanted to ask you about a book that was lately released, and ex-president Mr. Barack Obama spoke about a promised land and specifically dedicated a chapter to American-Israeli relationships. What do you say about it?
Well, first of all, you have raised an issue that is very, very important to certainly to the Jewish community, but I believe it should be important to all of America, and I'll tell you why. The book was published last month in November of 2020 by Penguin Random House, which is a major publisher in America. And it's, I believe, his third autobiography. Some people make fun of that, but he's entitled to as many biographies as he can write, autobiography. And he was paid millions of dollars for it, so good for him. And he called it, as you just said, A Promised Land. And he's referring to the promise of America. In the first week alone, Aryeh, the book sold more than 1.7 million copies, making it the highest selling book in Random House history. It also means, Aryeh, that millions upon millions of Americans who love Barack Obama and who have devoured his book, A Promised Land, they are going to be influenced by the things he writes in the book. And the truth is, there are many wonderful chapters in Mr. Obama's autobiography, which describe his life leading up to becoming president and much of his time as president. But the book also devotes a full chapter, it happens to be chapter 25, on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And what Mr. Obama writes in that chapter should be highly troubling to any American who knows anything about the history of the conflict, and certainly troubling to any Jew who cares about the future well-being of the state of Israel. Now, if I was speaking directly to your audience, since I speak through you, I'm going to put you on the spot. Many people do not know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask you and see whether you do or not. Aryeh, do you know what the letters PLO stand for? We all know that the PLO is the organization that basically became the Palestinian Authority. It was run by Yasser Arafat for years and years and years. It was a terrorist organization, and ultimately Yitzhak Rabin made peace with the PLO as part of the Oslo process. But I'm asking you this question. Do you know in English what the letters PLO stand for?
I believe that every Russian Jew, almost every Russian Jew, knows that it is Palestine Liberation Organization, similarly to Russian, which really means liberating Palestine from the Jews.
Okay, first of all, you went beyond what I wanted you to do. All I wanted you to do was give me what the words mean. So I'm going to ask you again because you said two things, and I want to make sure I understand which of them you're really saying. Tell me again, what do the letters PLO stand for?
Palestine Liberation Organization.
You are 100% correct. Most people, however, answer incorrectly and say Palestinian Liberation Organization. That would suggest it's a people's movement, and the thing they're trying to liberate are the Palestinian people. But it's not Palestinian, it's Palestine Liberation Organization, because as you point out, the PLO was created to liberate the land of Palestine. Now, Aryeh, in 1967, we had the famous Six-Day War, which was very important for the Jews of the former Soviet Union. Many people believe it awakened a certain sense of Jewish identity, and ultimately led to Reagan and the American government pressuring Gorbachev to open the gates and let the Jews of the former Soviet Union out. And that was in 1990 with Operation Exodus. But the Six-Day War of 1967 is pivotal in not only Jewish history for Russian Jewry, it's critical because it changed the map of Israel and the surrounding Arab countries. Because of the Six-Day War of 1967, Israel came into control of what's called the West Bank, which is a very misleading term. It's not a bank at all. It is a ridge. It is a mountain ridge. So that what really came under Israeli control was the West Ridge that was between the state of Israel and the Jordan River. Also the Golan Heights, the Gaza Strip, and the Sinai Desert all came under Israeli control in 1967. So the next question I ask in general, I'm asking you, and I think you'll know the answer. If the Six-Day War was in 1967, what year was the PLO created?
Well, it was actually created by Soviet security apparatus, I believe, or at least they were behind it as well. If I'm going to say 1963, is it correct?
Very, very good. It was 1964, but the same thing. The reason why it's important for Jews to understand when the PLO was created, it was created before the Six-Day War. It has nothing to do with the West Ridge. It has nothing to do with the Golan Heights. It has nothing to do with Gaza Strip. And now you explain, because you know this answer very well. If the PLO was created to liberate Palestine before the Six-Day War, what land was the PLO talking about?
It had nothing to do with occupation. Whatever we consider this land of the West Bank or these territories occupied or liberated, it has nothing to do with these lands that were occupied by the Israeli army in 1967. It meant Haifa, it meant Tel Aviv, and it meant the entire land of Israel is actually Arabs stated. I think Nasser, the president of Egypt, said basically throw them into the ocean, into the sea.
Mediterranean Sea. You are 100% correct. And out of curiosity, just for me, what percentage of the young people who are involved with RAGE do you think know the two things you've just explained?
Well, when they come to us, first of all, in a way, it's a self-selected group because people who want to join us, they have some kind of a identity already. Second, they are Russian Jews. And I think Russian Jews have a very strong affinity to the land of Israel, state of Israel, and many of them pride to be Jews. But even among those people, I can tell you that I saw a student, just one example, who went with me on the trip. And she said, I'm going to continue to trip to Africa. And she went with some kind of a group to Africa, but later on, she joined a group called Justice for Palestine, actually calling for boycott of Israel and already going to places like Gaza and the West Bank fighting with Israeli soldiers. A Russian, Brooklyn-raised Jew. Happens.
Absolutely. It happens among American American Jews who were born here, and as you say, they were raised in traditional Jewish homes, and they were Zionist, and then they go off to college, and they face all kinds of propaganda that is just one huge lie. But Jews love justice, RJ. So if somebody says, "Are you for justice in Palestine?" Young Jews say, "Of course." And if they say, "And if Israel is responsible for injustice, would you fight against that?" Of course I would. And the rest becomes a spiral, and there's a problem that becomes of that. In any case, you understand it. You said it well. I'd love to know whether there's a higher percentage of young American Russian Jews who understand this than there are American Native Americans, because American Jews in general do not know what you and I just said in any way.
I just want to say one thing, Mark. One of the greatest goals of my organization, the Russian American Jewish Experience, is actually to educate and inspire young Russian Jews, being, members of American Jewish community, and love and support Israel. And that requires education. A number of our students actually went on, and they are involved in educating others. So we would love to continue this conversation.
Yes, I don't understand, though, your point. What I thought you said was, you think most young Jews who were born or whose parents come from the former Soviet Union already know the answers to the questions of what the letters PLO stand for and when the PLO was created.
Correct. But nevertheless, when they go to colleges, yes, many of them are confused, but people that went through our programs, and I will introduce them to, and I'm sure we're going to have maybe even next time, we will ask some of these people to join, and they will tell you how they became leaders in educating the entire American Jewish community, inspiring young professionals, young Jewish professionals, for instance, to stand up to BDS and to misinformation. That is one of our main goals, to advocate for Israel or advocate for truth and justice in that regard.
Yeah, I was just trying to determine whether these young people learn because they've been at Rage, or do they know before they get to Rage?
I think that very gently we introduce these ideas as well as part of our curriculum, but many people who come from a Russian background, they know it from their parents. Like, okay. I know it. And probably they know it because they learned it in Soviet Union, hard way, and they also watch TV, so they know it from RTN.
Okay. Anyway, most American Jews think the PLO was created in response to the Six-Day War, and even now is an effort to liberate lands that came under Israeli control in 1967. And so they'll say the PLO was created sometime after the Six-Day War, but as you point out, in fact, the PLO was created by the Arab League. I don't know the extent to which the Soviet Union was involved. In 1964, 3 years before the Six-Day War. And that means, as you point out, what the Arab League was devoted to and what it meant by Palestine was the sovereign state of Israel. A nation state of the United Nations is what the PLO wants to destroy. This is basic, fundamental Middle East history. And if a former president of the United States writes about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and either doesn't know that the PLO was created in 1964 or knows when the PLO was created, but willfully, purposely distorts history, what does this say about a former president's book? What does it say about Mr. Obama's analysis and conclusions about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? How seriously should his perspective be taken? And then one worries, what other misconceptions is Barack Obama promulgating about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Now here, Aryeh, is how Mr. Obama portrays the emergence of the PLO after the Six-Day War. He wrote, and I'm now quoting from his book, Palestinians living within the occupied territories, mostly in refugee camps, found themselves governed by the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, and their movements and economic activity were severely restricted, prompting calls for armed resistance and resulting in the rise of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. For anyone unschooled in the history of Israel, which again is the overwhelming American population and includes a vast majority of American Jews, the clear impression in Mr. Obama's book is that the PLO was created after 1967 and was devoted to liberating, quote, occupied territories. And again, I'll say this, for you and those who understand what you do, you well know the history of Israel. I want you to listen to this sentence from Barack Obama's A Promised Land. This is a quote. For the next 3 decades after Israel's creation, Israel would engage in a succession of conflicts with its Arab neighbors. Most significantly, the Six-Day War of 1967, in which a greatly outnumbered Israeli military routed the combined armies of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. In the process, Barack Obama writes, Israel seized control of the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan, the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, and the Golan Heights from Syria. For anybody who knows the history of the Middle East, did Israel engage in a succession of conflicts with its Arab neighbors? Or was Israel attacked in 1948? Threatened economically in 1956, and on the brink of possible annihilation by the combined Arab forces of Egypt, Syria, and Jordan in 1967. The word engage, Aryeh, suggests Israel was at least complicit in the conflicts, if not responsible for them. And you know, Israel didn't seize control of territories. Israel came into control of certain territories in a defensive war of survival. And nowhere does Barack Obama recount how Israel pleaded with the king of Jordan, don't enter the war. And Israel promised not to step 1 foot on the West Bank if Jordan remained at peace. It was only when Jordan began shelling Jerusalem that Israel took defensive action against Jordan. Now, this is not a Jewish narrative. This isn't, Jewish propaganda. This is simple, factual history. One more passage for somebody like you and your audience who really know Israeli and Jewish history. Amazingly, Aryeh, Mr. Obama never mentions, not even one time, the League of Nations, and completely omits the fact that the League of Nations had a mandate system which it adopted in 1919, which gave international sanction to Great Britain's responsibility to create a Jewish Palestine. And if you ask, what's the legal basis for the state of Israel? Sometimes you'll get Jews say the Bible. Well, that's nice, but it's not a legal basis. Sometimes you'll hear people say the Balfour Declaration of 1914. That was a letter from an English official to the Jewish community. It had no legal status at all. And other people will say, well, it was the 1947 partition plan adopted by the United Nations, which was going to create two states, an Arab state and a Jewish state. And the truth is, all the UN did was affirm a decision made in 1919. It starts in 1919. It really goes up through 1920, 21, 22 by the League of Nations, which was the early version of the United Nations, that mandated means they were given the responsibility. Great Britain had the responsibility to create a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And very often you'll hear people say, well, the Jews colonized Israel or Palestine. First, the British colonized, and then the Jews colonized. This had nothing to do with colonization. This is the international world body at the end of World War I, coming together, all the nations who were part of the Allies. And they said after the war, you know what? There are people who live in various parts of the world and they don't have a country, a state of their own. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask some of the, quote, developed nations of the world, like France or Great Britain, to take the responsibility to help the indigenous people create a land of their own, a country of their own, a polity of their own, a sovereign state of their own. And when you do, you will leave and turn the government over to the people. So France was mandated, given the responsibility, to create Syria and Lebanon. There was no Syria before Israel. There was no Lebanon. They were all part of what was the Ottoman Empire through the end of World War I. And the World Organization of Nations said, let's create a Syria and a Lebanon and Iraq and a Jewish homeland in Palestine. And Palestine at that time was much larger than Israel is now. It was on both sides of the Jordan River. And then later on in the 1920s, Winston Churchill lopped off all of Palestine that was on the east side of the Jordan River and gave it to the Hashemite kingdom, which ultimately created first Transjordan and then Jordan, leaving only the land of Eretz Yisrael that was on the western side of the Jordan River. But Great Britain was given a mandate to create a Jewish homeland in the land of Palestine. Yet this is what Obama writes. Listen to this. He writes, at the end of the mandate, when Great Britain withdrew, which it was obligated to do, to leave the land after it had helped people set it up, the two sides quickly fell into war. And with Jewish militias claiming victory in 1948, the state of Israel was officially born. There is nothing true in that description of how Israel came into being. First of all, the two sides, the Arabs and the Jews, didn't quickly fall into war. The historical truth, this is not a narrative, this is not propaganda, this is truth, history. 7 Arab nations attacked the state of Israel the day after David Ben-Gurion read the Declaration of Independence of the modern state of Israel. Israel didn't fall into war. Israel had to desperately defend itself against a war of annihilation. And Jewish militias, by the way, I don't know if your audience is sophisticated enough to know the word militia is a very pejorative word. You know, in the Revolutionary War, you had militias in the states because you didn't have a nation with an army. Israel, when it was founded on May 14th of 1948, also created an army, the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces. And it was the Israel Defense Forces which had the responsibility of defending Israel against these 7 Arab nations. And Jewish militias didn't claim victory, nor was it in 1948, by the way. The War of Independence actually lasted until January of 1949, and it ended with a ceasefire brokered by the United States. And most importantly of all, Aryeh, the state of Israel was not officially born after the War of Independence. Israel was officially born the day the British ended their mandated administration of Palestine, and when David Ben-Gurion got up in a hall in Tel Aviv under a large portrait of Theodor Herzl and read for the first time ever the Declaration of Independence of the modern state of Israel, the first time Jews had sovereignty in their own land, really from the time of the Maccabees, which we are going to be celebrating next week with Hanukkah. Israel was not born out of a war with the Arab nations. Israel was born in accordance with international legal sanctions of the League of Nations, affirmed later in the partition plan of the United Nations in 1947. And on May 14th, 1948, it took the President of the United States, Harry S. Truman, only 11 minutes after David Ben-Gurion read the Declaration of Independence to formally recognize the official birth of the State of Israel, May 14th, 1948. And only after the State of Israel was officially born did the Arab nations seek to annihilate the infant Jewish state and push every Jew, just as Nasser claimed in 1967 he would, into the Mediterranean Sea. None of this is described in Mr. Obama's chapter on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And you know, Aryeh, details matter. The details matter. Because the details are what shape the way people think and feel. In this case, hundreds of thousands of ill-informed people will read Mr. Obama's book and will assume that his description of the underlying Israeli-Palestinian conflict, his description is accurate. And the impression Mr. Obama gives in his chapter is that at best, both sides equally responsible. At worst, Israel's the bad guy in the story. Why? Because Israel took Palestinian land. because Israel seized the West Bank and has been a brutal occupying force ever since, only to be fought by those who consider themselves to be freedom fighters, not terrorists. People who go into schools, as they did in Ma'alot, and murder children, they're freedom fighters in Barack Obama's lexicon, not terrorists. People who fought to destroy Israeli civilian life in pizza shops, in discotheques, at Passover Seders, who would go into a synagogue and literally hack praying rabbis to death, who would blow themselves up in buses, who would maim and kill. These are not freedom fighters. Freedom fighters don't target civilians. These are terrorists. And you should understand, Arya, and your audience should understand. Bottom line, every argument against Israel is grounded, is based in one underlying premise, on one idea, that Jews stole Palestinian land. And that is implicit in Mr. Obama's chapter on Israel. By the way, he goes on and on and on. And for example, at one point he describes a visit by Ariel Sharon to the Temple Mount. Ariel Sharon, of course, was a heroic general in the Six-Day War. He would then become prime minister later on. And he was the prime minister in 2005 when he made the decision to withdraw all Israelis. Every single Israeli was withdrawn from Gaza. And all of Gaza was handed over to the Palestinians of Gaza. And Israel left the greenhouses so that they would have something actually to build the economy upon. And all the Palestinians had to do in Gaza was create a humane society. It's on the Mediterranean Sea. By the way, wealthy Arabs, wealthy Palestinians living in Gaza live in mansions, like you'd see in Beverly Hills, America. Mansions on the Mediterranean Sea. And Gazans had the opportunity to create in Gaza a Monaco of the East, of the Middle East, a tourist attraction, a tourist haven that would flourish, be gorgeous. People would flock to it from all over the country, from all over the world. But instead, Hamas took control of Gaza and only had one goal: destroying the state of Israel. So they built tunnels to come into Israel and slit the throats of Israelis in kibbutz dining halls. And they fired 800 rockets into Israel, creating a miserable existence for the Jews living in southern Israel, and especially in Sderot. And many people, in retrospect, think that Ariel Sharon made a mistake with what was called the disengagement in Gaza, meaning withdrawing every soldier and every civilian Israeli out of Gaza. And Barack Obama never mentions, ever, in his chapter on Israel, the disengagement from Gaza, the withdrawal from Gaza. But when he does write about Ariel Sharon, he writes about Ariel Sharon's visit, he was not yet prime minister, to the Temple Mount. Now, I'm sure your audience knows Israel made a conscious decision to give the Temple Mount into Muslim control. The Waqf is one who administers the Temple Mount. There are 2 mosques on the Temple Mount. Each one of those is holy to the religion of Islam. One is the Dome of the Rock. It's the one that has the golden dome, which ironically, this Muslim dome to many Jews symbolizes Jerusalem. I find that always just amazing, ironic, silly. But the Temple Mount was also the holiest spot in the Jewish world and remains so to this day. And when Jews flock to the Western Wall and pray at the Western Wall, they're not praying at the temple. The Western Wall was it's called in English, the retaining wall, meaning it was a wall that went all around the Temple Mount and held the Temple Mount in place. Then the temple was built on top of that mound. The temple was destroyed in the year 70 by the Romans. There's no temple left. There's no wall of the temple left. The only thing that is left is the wall, the retaining wall that goes around the entire area that used to house the temple. And the western side of that wall has become the kotel. Kotel is the Hebrew word for wall. It's Kotel HaMaravi. It's the western wall. By the way, sometimes Jews call it the Wailing Wall because Jews were seen crying at the wall. It's not a wailing wall. It's the western wall. And it becomes a surrogate, a replacement for the Temple Mount. So Jews from all over the world, when they go to Israel, they want to go see the Western Wall. They want to touch it. They want to stand there. Maybe they'll take a piece of paper and write a prayer and stick it inside the wall, the cracks of the stones. There's this poetic sense that God reads all of the notes that are put into the cracks between the stones of the Western Wall. But in this instance, Ariel Sharon wasn't going to the Western Wall. He wanted to go up the path that leads to the Temple Mount, and he wanted to pray there.
You think he went into the tunnels, or I'm mistaken?
It's irrelevant. Tunnels did not create the problem. It was that he wanted to go up the path. You know what path I'm talking about. The path up to the Temple Mount. And it was announced that Ariel Sharon is coming to go on the Temple Mount. Now, Americans in general, American Jews in particular, and your audience in very much particular, should ask themselves this question. What kind of world do we live in where Muslims are protected by the state of Israel to keep control of the Temple Mount, which is not their holiest spot? Mecca is number one, Medina is number two. It's Unclear where Jerusalem becomes holy to them at all, except they don't like Jews. But how is it that when Israel protects the Muslims' right to control that piece of sacred Jewish territory, how is it that they will not allow Jews to visit? How is it that that piece of land is what's known as Judenrein, which was the Nazi attempt to make Germany Jew-free, no Jews? How does any piece of Israel become Judenrein? And if Ariel Sharon wants to go stand on the Temple Mount, he's not hurting anybody, not doing anything. It certainly is not a provocation that should create an intifada. And that's the way the Palestinians used it. They knew he was coming, and they were going to use that visit as a pretext for the second intifada, in which more than 1,000 Jews were murdered. Barack Obama describes this event. And Aryeh, what he writes is, Ariel Sharon was provocative, meaning he did this on purpose, because he was visiting the holiest site to the Muslim people. And he never mentions the Temple Mount, first of all, isn't the holiest spot to the Muslim people. Again, Mecca is. But he never mentions, Aryeh, that the Temple Mount has been for, I don't know, almost 3,000 years. The first temple was built by King Solomon about 1,900 years before the Common Era. And now we're in the, third millennium. Roughly 3,000 years ago, the temple became the holiest spot to the Jewish world. And Barack Obama doesn't mention it? And imagine you are now, you don't know better. And this is Barack Obama. 70% of American Jews voted for Barack Obama twice. They love this guy. And don't get me wrong, by the way, it was thrilling when America elected the first African American. It said something about America, which the minute Donald Trump became president was forgotten. It meant that America was not a racist society or a racist country. We elected a black president twice. And he is liberal, and he's beloved by most Jews. And now they're going to come and read this chapter. Kids are going to come and read this chapter. By kids, I mean college kids. Jews in their 30s and 40s. They're going to read this book. They don't know better. And they're going to think that Barack Obama is describing the reality. That the Temple Mount belongs to Islam. That Israel was only created after a war. That both sides fell into war. Not that one side said in the Declaration of Independence, we welcome any Arab, and they weren't Palestinians at the time, although that really is secondary, any Arab who wants to remain in the state of Israel will have full civil rights, economic rights, social rights, and political rights, which is why in Israel, Arab Israelis can vote in Israeli elections, and there's actually an Arab party in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And every now and then, you'll hear somebody like a Jimmy Carter, another former president, describe Israel as apartheid. Black South Africa was apartheid because blacks were not allowed to participate in any way in South African life. They were segregated. They were kept apart. They had no rights. They didn't vote. They didn't have a party. That's what apartheid is. In Israel, Arabs vote. They're full citizens. They have a political party in the Knesset. And I want to make sure no one misunderstands me. There is still a second-degree citizen in the non-Jew and in the Arab. That's called human. But what Israel is doing is trying its best to eliminate any second-class status for Arab Israelis, for Palestinian Israelis. It is not an apartheid society in any stretch of the imagination. And when people say, wait a minute, include the West Bank in that. The Arabs on the West Bank, the Palestinians on the West Bank, they don't vote. Well, first of all, they do vote. They vote in their own Palestinian elections. Mahmoud Abbas was elected president of the Palestinian Authority for a 4-year term. That was almost 12 years ago. How ironic. The democracy of the Palestinian world. They elect a president for 4 years and then don't have an election for 11, 12, I think it's going on 13 years. So they do vote. And within their community, they have social control, educational control, political control, police control. They have their own media, their own newspaper, their own website, and their own television channel. And Israeli soldiers aren't there. The one thing that is true is that Israeli soldiers retain the right to enter the Palestinian community to stop terrorism. And all the Palestinians have to do is end terrorism themselves. They'll never see an Israeli soldier. And anytime Israel, the Palestinians want to make peace with Israel, Israel is more than ready, because Israelis don't want their grandchildren to have to do what they and their children did, serve in the IDF against a vicious, murderous enemy. This is why I am terribly upset by Mr. Obama's chapter on Israel in his autobiography, A Promised Land. And I hope anyone who's listening to us today becomes articulate enough to also explain to anybody they come across how insidious and deceptive Barack Obama's chapter is. And when you say to me, what's on my mind today? You've now heard it.
I think it's not only misleading, it's so dangerous.
Yes.
Not only for Israel and Jews, it's so dangerous to America.
Explain why.
Because misunderstanding the Middle East conflict and calling terrorists freedom fighters distorts the picture of reality, and therefore you cannot stand to protect your own country. In a way, they accept what really mind-boggling for me is to hear the president of the free world, Barack Obama, the ex-president, adopting the KGB narrative. Whatever you said here, it is the KGB narrative.
That's brilliant.
That's
I
what
thought,
they.
I thought you were going to say the Palestinian narrative.
Oh no, Palestinians were not sophisticated enough. As you remember yourself, Mohammed Abbas was studying in Moscow University of Foreign, whatever it is, Patrice Lumumba. It was like KGB branch of recruiting agents from foreign countries. And I was studying Moscow Telecommunication Institute, and I had students from Palestine who actually were studying, how to fight Israelis. So they were training Palestinians in special camps for terrorist activity, for teaching them how to fight and also how to think. So that is a KGB narrative. The Palestinian people was created by, the KGB special department. So, but that is understandable. It was a Cold War, and they used Palestinians as a way to fight America and push Americans out of the Middle East. But how an American president and another president, Jimmy Carter, and others adopting, I would say, terrorist view of the world, because KGB was a terrorist organization, creating terrorist organizations to destabilize the world, to destabilize Western world, to conquer the world, to win the Cold War. Soviet Union collapsed, but the ideology of the Cold War continues to thrive within American universities and even at the White House.
Very frightening, isn't it?
One of my friends once said to me when you come to a classroom and you teach these young Russian Jewish school children, remember, you're fighting on a battlefield against Stalin and Hitler. Mm-hmm. What you did right now, you fought the hatred of Stalin, Hitler, and I would say hatred of anti-Semitism, of centuries that threatened our very existence and was a curse not only for us, but for anti-Semites themselves. So we can only overcome this darkness with light and hatred with love. And this is what your TV is actually doing for all of us. So I want once again to welcome you and urge my listeners to please know more about the JBS. Can you please tell us how people can actually listen to more of your programming?
Yes. First of all, anybody can watch the Jewish Broadcasting Service, JBS. It's on virtually every cable system in America. It's on Optimum, channel 138. 138. It's on Verizon, Fios 798. It's on DirecTV 388. It is on Spectrum, channel 219. And Aryeh, this coming Tuesday, JBS premieres on the largest single cable system in America, Comcast, as channel 1684. And I also want to invite your viewers, your audience. This Wednesday, my own program is L'chaim. It's at 9:00. I've been honored to have you do 2 programs with me on L'chaim. But I am interviewing a woman named Masha Merkalova on Wednesday.
From San Francisco. I know her, San Francisco.
Yes, but that's not where she's from. She's from the former Soviet Union. And she did not know she was a Jew until she became 16 years of age. Then later on, she came to America, has become passionate about the state of Israel, is a passionate Zionist and has created an organization called Club Z, Z for Zionist. And she works with teenagers, trying to educate them about the truth of Zionism, meaning a commitment that there should be a Jewish homeland, so that when they go to college, they will be better prepared for the propaganda and the hatred they will confront from other students, from organizations like SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, and even from their professors. So I hope some of your people might try to be sure they're watching Wednesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, New York time, Masha Merkalova on L'chaim.
Thank you. My warmest regards to her. And I wanted to ask you, what about us lighting candle together with our students at that very time next week on Thursday, 6 p.m.? A possibility?
It's a possibility. We'll see what we can do.
But would be an interesting idea. We can prepare a group of students together with you lighting the first candle.
And by the way, the truth is, there's the child story of Hanukkah, the one about the miracle of the light staying on for 8 nights, although on one night's worth of oil. A lovely, lovely story. And there's the history of Hanukkah.
We would love to hear that from you.
Which is magnificent and which becomes the basis of the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence of this noble experiment called the United States of America. I would be, let's try
to be confirmed. To be
exactly
confirmed.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful to be with you.
It's such a pleasure. We learned so much, and it was a definitely amazing explanation of history of Jewish state and understanding between right and wrong and darkness and light. Thank you so much. All the best to you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.